Okay, today we will continue with history of China. So that will be our Civilization series number 7 and the second one on China. This is roughly a timetable of timeline of the Chinese history. We talk about the prehistory of China. So today we will continue with the history parts. Okay, so let's have a brief overlook first.
Chinese history has been centered around and between its great rivers, most notably the Yangtze River Valley in the south, and in the north, the Yellow River. Even in Neolithic times, the fertile plains surrounding the rivers could support large populations with large surpluses of food, enabling these Stone Age cultures to cultivate a variety of crops and domesticated animals while becoming increasingly sophisticated. The Lung Shan introduced silk production and created a refined form of strong yet extremely thin pottery with near machine-like precision. These early peoples were extremely vulnerable to the flooding of these great rivers. Many thousands could die from an unexpected flood. From the Lun Shan evolved the semi-mythical Xiao Dynasty, who was able, through sophisticated irrigation techniques, protect the cities from flooding and further increase crop yields. This possibly enabled the first emperors to rule over multiple peoples, ensuring they were fed and protected from natural disasters. And they were said to have the mandate of heaven. The Xiao would be conquered by the Shang. These extremely warlike people brought the Middle Kingdom fully into the Bronze Age and into history because they were the first to begin to widely use writing. They were known for their cruelty and incorporated vast amounts of slaves into their armies. They would be conquered by the Xiao Dynasty, whom were aided by many slaves defecting from the Shang to join their cause. The long-lived Xiao Dynasty saw the development of some fundamental institutions within society, chiefly the philosophies of Taoism that advocated humility and religious piety to live a harmonious and fulfilling life, and Confucianism that emphasized living a rational life to be most fulfilled. A complex feudalistic system also developed, where 70 quasi-independent states paid homage to a single emperor. Over the centuries, these states developed independent cultures and identities, and the Zhou Empire devolved into nation states, entangled in near constant warfare with each other. Out of centuries of chaos, the state of Qin, under the emperor Qin Shi Huang, united all under heaven, and is considered the first leader of a unified China. In order that China stay unified, he is said to have ordered a massive amount of book burnings and executed scholars to erase the histories of the individual states so that the nation should only have one identity and one history. Qin Shi Huang ordered the construction of large portions of the Great Wall of China, built a massive canal connecting the north and south of the country, and built an impressive tomb, among many other projects during his reign. His dynasty would not last long, though. Following the death of Qin Shi Huang, the empire descended into revolt and chaos. The province of Han consolidated power and maintained the unified realm. The Han were contemporaries of the Roman Empire and would export massive amounts of silk over what would become known as the Silk Road. Because this was so profitable, they expanded the empire westwards to control the vital trade route. This is considered China's first golden age, and this period saw many famous generals and scientific advancement. The Han Empire eventually split in three, with each partition having an emperor claiming legitimate succession from the Han. The Jin were descended from generals who usurped the imperial throne. They would unite China again, but their reigns were seldom peaceful and were marked with violence and disorganization, and devolved into local rule where 16 kingdoms warred against each other, with two emerging as longtime rivals in the period known as the Northern and Southern Dynasties. This period is often considered a dark age and was dominated by warlords who raided the land and by barbarian incursions. The Sui dynasty was a short-lived imperial dynasty in China of pivotal significance. The Sui unified Northern and Southern dynasties and reinstalled the rule of ethnic Han Chinese and began a process of cultural integration of the barbarians that had migrated into China during the centuries of chaos. It was succeeded by the Tang dynasty, which largely inherited its foundations. The Tang dynasty is often considered the zenith of Chinese civilization and is the Second Golden Age. This period was marked with internal stability, scientific advancement, and cultural refinement. It was during this period that the Chinese culture spread throughout Asia, fueled by many merchants, artisans, and philosophers from the surrounding kingdoms, which were welcomed into the courts and halls of study throughout the Tang period. All good things come to an end, and so did the Tang. They began to persecute Buddhists and were increasingly authoritarian by the end of their dynasty. And after putting down several rebellions, they were deposed, and China once again entered a period of chaos. Out of this period, the Song Dynasty unified China. Their dynasty is marked for its technological achievement, including the magnetic compass, gunpowder, and mass printing, which they used to create the world's first national paper currency. This age of enlightenment would be brought to a swift end when the Mongols invaded and Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, would establish the Yuan dynasty. For the first time, the entire Silk Road connecting China to Europe was ruled by one power, and the Yuan dynasty saw a great period of diversity of culture and material goods flowing into China. This dynasty would be short-lived and was supplanted by the Ming dynasty. This dynasty is seen as a prosperous time and a high point for art and literature. They were succeeded by the long-lived Qing Dynasty, which began like a golden age and ended in disaster. That was first triggered by the British obsession with tea. They loved drinking it, but they hated paying the Qing ton after ton of gold and silver for it. So they came up with an evil empire solution, if there ever was one, and illegally flooded China with opium. When the Qing clamped down on the British opium trade, the British went to war to make sure that the opium kept flowing into China. China stagnated afterwards and closed itself off as much as possible from the West. And in 1911, the last emperor of China was removed from the throne in a deal made by the boy emperor's advisors, which they did not inform him of, and pretended he was still emperor for some time. Imperial China was succeeded by the Republic of China, and then the People's Republic of China. This has been Epimetheus. If you enjoyed this lightning speed version of...
So this is a very quick overview of the Chinese history. So today we were looking at the period labeled blue here. We talk about the prehistory here, and then today we were looking at the history. Unfortunately, this part of history, many of the written words is not understood by modern Chinese, so there's quite a bit of wiggling room here, how much we actually know about that part of the Chinese history. So we would start with the Xiao Dynasty. So the Xiao Dynasty is from 2070 to 1600 BC. It's still a little bit of mythical, but with more and more archaeological discovery, we find the concrete existence of this dynasty. In this dynasty, there are already some kind of writing. And then we move on to the Shaan Dynasty, which is the next part here. So I move the button the wrong way. This is the area of Shaan Dynasty. We notice this now. Here is this is the river, the Yangtze River, and the Yellow River is right up here and then going down around here. So it is between the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. This is one of those gold foil discovered in the Shan period. This is another one, which is bronze. This is the Bronze Age of China. And we have a wine vessel for drinking. So this is the Shan Dynasty here. I might have mixed up a little bit. Okay, anyway, the Shan Dynasty is from 1600 to 1000 BC. Just like in the Bible, we have a list of one king giving die and his younger brother becomes king and then becomes that. So we know that there's a series of 31 kings during the Shaan Dynasty. These are some of the artifacts that we discovered from the dynasty. Again, it is the Bronze Age, as I said. Another one, which is a thing, which is a very large one, and then probably this is used to hold water or hold wine. This is the axe. I think this is the cutting edge here. Another one, this again for preserving drinks. Then we move to the Xiao Dynasty. The Xiao Dynasty is one of the longest dynasty in Chinese history. It lasts almost 700 years. 700 years, yes. It's from 1000 BC to 256 BC. Sorry. So it is one of the largest dynasty in Chinese history. By the end of the second millennium BC, the Xiao Dynasty began to emerge in the Yellow River, overrunning the territory of Shan. The Zhao appear to have begun their rule under a semi-feudal system and then last long time. Because it's a feudal system, that means the kingdom is divided into smaller states, and each state will have some kind of king there, and then all the king provide tributes to the emperor of Zhao. This is the approximate size of Zhao when at about 1000 BC. It is one of the sphere. This part, it's again, is the Bronze era of China. Another bronze vessel, one of the weapon, which is both a sphere and a dagger axe. So this will be the sharp cutting edge with a long pole attached here. So this can be used to attack horses' feet, or as an axe. This is the sharp edge hitting the enemy. Another thing, which is a drinking vessel, this one with the cover. And then we enter into the spring and autumn period. During this period, the China is very unstable. There's a lot of fighting in between, but this also is the era where a lot of philosophical developments happens. It is interesting to note that this is 700 to 470 BC. I think Buddha also is born within this period. Within this period, we have the Tao, the Confucian, etc. So this is a very interesting period, both in China and in the world. And in this period, it's still mostly under using the Zhao Dynasty's way, but it is much more divided. And there are many city-states established, and then it is also a crucial period for the establishment of the Chinese culture. At that time, we have the so-called 100 school of thoughts blossomed during this period. So it will produce major thinking of philosophy, such as the Confucianism, Taoism, Legalism, Moism, etc. So we will look at four of these to give you a better understanding of the Chinese culture. The first one is, of course, Confucianism. Confucianism is also called Yuism. It's a system of thought and behavior originating in ancient China. Various describes as a tradition, a philosophy, a religion, a humanistic or a rationalistic religion, a way of governing, and a way of life. So Confucianism covers almost every aspect of Chinese life. The main idea is we have the dichotomy between religion and humanism. In Chinese culture, we do not have the equivalent of a God creating the universe. There might be many deities, each in local culture. We do not believe in a single God. In one way, we can also consider Confucianism not a religion because it has no God. It's talking about the natural humans' moral nature. We are born with a idea of what's right and what's wrong. So this is anchorage of the heaven. The heaven got a set of rules, and this set of rules is inherited in human beings, and therefore human beings can improve our standing by learning, by practicing moral behavior. And the government under Confucianism is that it is important for the government to maintain an authority. This authority is exercised through its humane solutions to help people solve their daily problem. The emperor is a representation from heaven. He is the son of heaven. And this son of heaven got the right to rule because he is morally superior. And he also got the mandate of heaven to rule. Once, if the emperor is not fair and just as reflected in his actions, then the mandate of heaven may be withdrawn. And with that, then the emperor, the dynasty will collapse and somebody will take over, becomes the son of heaven, and then start ruling China. And Confucianism is also very much concentrated within the public goods. It concentrates with the idea of yuan. This yuan, in terms of Chinese writing, the left side here, this article here, reticle here is represent human. And the other side of it is the number 2. So this word represents how two human beings can get together, living together, staying together with each other's respecting each other, how they can coexist. So the whole concept of Confucianism centers on how humans, or we, can coexist. In order to coexist, then there is an idea of yi, which is the upholding of righteousness and the moral disposition to do good. And then how a person can do that? Because he can learn it. So that is the ji, is the ability to see what is right and what is wrong. And the converse in the behavior exhibited by others. Confucianism holds one in contempt, either passively or actively, for failure to uphold the cardinal moral values of yuan, how to live together with one another, and yi, which is the righteousness and the moral dispositions. How do we do that? We maintain light, which is the rituals when you greet each other. So you greet each other with a respect that is light, and you think about how to coexist with other people. That's young, and then you have to uphold righteousness and moral disposition because you have to obtain yi. How are these being learned? Well, because we have the ji, which means that we can understand what is right and what is wrong. So Confucianism is very much about continuously improving oneself so that you can coexist with other people and uphold righteousness. And when you interact with people, you are polite and respect because you got your intellect to learn to do the right thing.
So did you say they is there life after death for them, or?
Oh, they doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
The Confucianism in most of Chinese philosophy or religion, we do believe in afterlife. For example, in Taoism can be looked at both a philosophical aspect and a spiritual aspect. In the spiritual aspect, in the religious aspect, they do believe in afterlife. But Taoism is contemporary with Confucianism. Taoism is started by Laozi. Laozi is a little bit older than Confucius. They have met, and Confucius regard himself as a student of Laozi, of Taoism. So Taoism and Confucianism is almost at the same time. Taoism has been split into two separate family, or one is like a religion. Okay, the other one is a philosophy. I'm more interested in its philosophy rather than its religion aspect. In the philosophy aspect, we are talking about yin yang, the opposite side. One is strong, one is flexible, or fire and water, dualism. And then we Taoism talk about a dichotomy, two things, and these two things interact with each other. It is the balance between them that is the best way we live our life. You don't be on one either extreme. Take the middle ground. At that time, the Chinese is fighting each other. There's at the end of the Xiao Dynasty, so there's a lot of different warlords starting up. Some of them still respect the Zhao's emperor, but others don't. So these kings among them fighting among themselves, and there's a lot of scholar traveling around China and trying to resolve what is the best way to govern. One of the methods is legalism, or put it in modern terms, it can be said as the rule of law. So under legalism, the Chinese say, well, we have to set up our rules. And if the rules are set up correctly so that the people can follow the rules, then your little kingdom, your little part can become very prosperous. So they are talking about how to change the government in order to improve the standing of the king of that little kingdom. Of course, the stronger the kingdom is, the more likely you are able to conquest to fight other kingdoms and then expand your territory. The more you expand the territory, the more wealth your kingdom have and becomes stronger. So there is a school of thought in those times, talking about what is the best way to implement a good country or a good kingdom. Now, at that time, up to now, we have three different ideas now already. Now, one is the Confucianism. Confucius likewise has been traveling around different kingdoms and trying to sell his idea to the kings and asking the kings to govern the kingdom using respect, using moral rights, teaching the people to treat each other well and uphold righteousness. So that is one school of thought. Another school of thought is from the Taoism. The Taoism is telling the king and everybody else that, well, you may be strong now, but you will become weak later on. Just like the bamboo. The bamboo can stay up. In the strong wind, it will bend over. But after the wind dies, it will come up again. So that's the strength of flexibility. If you have a tree, the tree stand up very well. When the winds blow, the tree might be able to stand against the wind. But if the wind is too strong, then the whole tree will be uprooted and then felled. Once the tree is felled, it will not be able to bounce back. And therefore, it is better to be flexible than very, very strong. That is the Tao's idea. Another idea they have observed is that we have the roof, okay? At the end of the roof, the water will run down. As the water runs down, it will drip down and they will hit the stone underneath the roof. At that time, they already noticed, although water is very soft, but because of this continuous dripping, even as hard as stone, there will be a little hole there. So they're again saying that the flexible thing like water, if you can persist, you can do it continuously, then you will see the effort. Now that is Taoism. For legalism, they are saying, okay, in order to rule the country, you have to make some rules. And if the rules are implemented correctly, everybody working under the same rules, then you will get advanced. So that is very much the idea of rule of law in today's terms. The government try to set some laws, some rules. For example, one of the most significant change is the tax system. We have a piece of land. We divide a piece of land into 9 different parts. The central parts belong to the government. And surrounding, there will be 8 different families looking after each of the 8 other parts. But these 8 families had to contribute to make sure the center part also is producing, and that is their tax. So by implementing such a law or rule, then the government have a sustained income to support its army. So that is one of the ideas proposed by the legalism scholars at that time. And that actually made Qing, the first emperor, very, very powerful later on. And the Qing kingdom becomes one of the largest kingdom, more powerful kingdom, and then eventually conquered everybody else and becomes the first emperor. The goal of this legalists was to conquest and then unify everything under the heaven. Okay, what as long as you can see under the heaven by using ruler techniques. Another thing to explain this idea is, if I'm a carpenter, I'm making a chair. My ruler is not the same as your ruler. That it is very difficult for two carpenters to make the same chair because they will be using different measurements. So one of the ideas actually we standardize the measurements. Standardization measurements, including the length, the weights, etc. So there is a lot of these standardization ideas already during the autumn and spring period in China, or the late Xiao Dynasty. Here is the fourth important thinking. There is the Modism. Mod is the name of the person who promoted this idea. It promoted the idea of universal love. Roughly translated, you need to care for people who, although it's not related to you by blood, but it's because we are all human, we have to take care of each other. So this is kind of the universal love idea, as promoted, for example, by Jesus in the Western system. But in the Chinese system, we also talk about that about 200 years before Jesus was born. Okay, BC, about 200 BC. Then we talk about this idea. So we see that at that time we have a lot of different philosophers. We are talking about 100 different philosophers wandering around the whole country under the Xiao Dynasty areas. At that time, because it's a feudal system, and therefore each area is managed by a little king, and the king has his own kingdom, his land. These kings are fighting against each other, trying to expand its territory, very much similar to the Dark Ages in the European history, where we have different kingdoms and then trying to balance each other through power, etc. So this is what's happening. At that same time, a whole number of philosophers coming up with different ideas about all kinds of things, philosophy, ways of life, how to rule, etc., etc. And these philosophers are taking in students, trying to promote their ideas, as well as going around the whole country, talking to the kings, and then trying to convince the kings to use their method. So Modism promotes a philosophy of impartial caring. That is, a person should care equally for all other individuals, regardless of their actual relationship to him or her. The expression of this indiscriminate caring is what makes man a righteous being in the Maoist thought. During the Maozi era, war and famine were common, and population growth was seen as a moral necessity for a harmonious society. The material wealth of Marxism, consequentialism, refers to the basic needs like shelter and clothing. So at that time, China is already experimenting with a lot of different ideas. In other words, we can say this is a kind of socialism. We take care of everybody impartially, with even you are not related to the person. Mozi deposits that when society functions as an organized organism, the waste and the inefficiencies found in the natural state without organization are reduced. He believed that the conflicts are born from the absence of moral uniformity found in human cultures in the natural state, i.e. the absence of the definition of what is right and what is wrong. According to Marjorie, we must therefore choose leaders who will surround themselves with righteous followers, who will then create the hierarchy that harmonize the right and the wrong. She, Fei, she is what's right, Fei is what's wrong. Who will then create the hierarchy that harmonizes Xi Fei. In that sense, the government becomes an authoritative automated tool. Assuming that the leaders in the social hierarchies are perfectly conformed to the ruler, who is perfectly submissive to heaven, conformity in speech and behavior expected of all people. So again, we are not only talking about the ruling class have to be righteous. We are also talking about ordinary citizens should be able to judge what's right and what's wrong, and then practice what's right and what's wrong. So in that sense, the Chinese culture for over 2,000 years already have this idea of the government is not just the government. The government is also responsible to promote the righteous thinking of its citizens so that the government can be ruled or the country can be ruled more appropriately. So that is very different, I think, from the Western idea of government. A Western idea of government only talk about the government, okay, ruling over the population without talking about the responsibility of teaching the population what is right and what is wrong. What is right, what is wrong is only declared through law so that people will be obliged by law. If you break the law, you get punished. But in Chinese culture, we are also talking about how to enable common citizens to understand what's right and what's wrong, and therefore will not break the rule or break the law. So Marjorie believed that the norm of handing out important government responsibilities to one's relatives, regardless of capabilities, as opposed to those who are best equipped to handle this responsibility, restricted social mobility. Now we come into the idea of bureaucracy. So when you run the government, so previously in a feudal system, the important jobs of the governing is delegated to people with related to you by blood, so relatives. But here Marjorie suggests, no, this might not be the best person for the job. You better try to find the best people among your citizens to actually do the job itself. So it is starting to have the idea of bureaucracy. The government is not directly related by blood to the king or emperor. That idea eventually makes Chinese culture last so long. That is a very important fundamental idea why we say, okay, the Chinese can read back the text 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, all this because of Chinese already started thinking along these different ways of governing. Mao Zedong taught that as long as a person was qualified for a task, he should keep his position regardless of blood relations. If an officer were incapable, even if he were a close relative of the ruler, he ought to be demoted, or even if meant poverty, meant he will come in, becomes poor. So this bureaucracy idea starting to emerge in China as well. Law and order was a very important aspect of Mozi's philosophy. He compared the carpenter who uses standard tools to do his work with ruler who might not have any standards by which to rule at all. The carpenter is always better off when depending on his standard tools rather than on his emotions. Ironically, as his decisions affect the fate of an entire nation, it is even more important that a ruler maintains a set of standards and yet he has none. That is, again, rule of law. The idea that the government or the ruler will have some kind of standards, and these standards had to be made known to its population, the population of citizens. These standards cannot originate from man, since no man is perfect. The only standards that a ruler uses have to originate from heaven, since only heaven is perfect. That Lord heaven is love. So the whole idea is about compassion. You are compassionate, then you think in that terms, then your rule or your law will be the same as the heaven's law, and therefore you will continue to rule, and you becomes the son of heaven. Should the ruler be unrighteous, 7 disasters could result for that nation. These 7 disasters are the what? Number 1, neglect of the country's defense. Yet there's such lavish on the palace. That means the ruler is spending a lot of money on himself, not on the country. Then your country will eventually come with a disaster. The second one is when pressured by foreigners, neighboring countries are not willing to help. I'm a country. If somebody attack me and nobody helping me, I cannot resist the attack. But if we all join together, we will form a stronger force to resist the attack. So it is crucial that you also offer help to your neighbors. So there are 2 interesting ideas in terms of how to start conquest. One idea is that you maintain good relationship from your furthest neighbor, and then with that, you can attack your local neighbor, because your friend at the other end will also be able to attack the other country from the other side, and therefore you create an attack on one country from different directions, causing the country to become weak and eventually conquered by you. So that's one way of expanding your territory, is to make alliances with countries furthest from you. And then you start expanding your territory. But eventually everybody understand I will eventually become your nearest neighbor, and then you will attack me. So after some time, this strategy doesn't work. But anyway, that was one of the ideas also promoted during that period. Number 3, the people are engaged in unconstructed work while useless fools are rewarded. So if you reward the fool will not be producing constructive things. So you are wasting resources. So again, what is useless fools? Those fools which do not practice that universal love. Number 4, law and regulations become too heavy, such that there is repressive fear, and people only look after their own good. So again, if your law is too restrictive, the punishment too big, then people will actually cannot have freedom to do what they want to do. And therefore, the people are living in fear. Then people will be very selfish, just looking after themselves, make sure they will not break the law, which doesn't help because, again, under this idea, we have universal love. We want the people to help each other. But in terms of helping each other, you may break some law, maybe. But if your punishment is lenient, then if a punishment recognize the empathy there, then you will promote a better relationship among people. Number 5, the ruler lives in a mistaken illusion of his own ability and his country's strength. You overestimate your ability. That is usually disastrous. We can see it today in our international politics. Number 6, trust people are not loyal, while loyal people are not trusted. Make sure that you know how to trust those who are loyal to you. If you can't do that, then your country will get into problem. This last one is lack of food. Human cannot survive without food. So the ability to provide the citizens with food is very important. Ministers are not able to carry out their work. Punishment fails to bring fear, and reward fails to bring happiness. Because after all, our primary human right is food. You can't even feed yourself. There's no human right, and there's no happiness and so forth. So it is very important to make sure the food production is not tampered with. After all this spring, autumn and spring period, then when enter into the warring state period. As I said, these two periods are almost overlapping each other. And so it is also at the same time that it is the warring period, about the same time. During this period of time, the different kingdoms within the Xiao Dynasty are fighting each other. Until eventually the Qing Dynasty, the Qing Kingdom win over everybody and then becomes the Qing Dynasty. At that time, the warring states look something like that, and Qing is in this region. And so this region eventually conquered everybody else to form the first emperor, the first empire of China. Oh. So these are again the one of the arms that we have seen. Again, these are the cutting edge. The pole will be attached here so that it can be used to attack the horse's feet by pulling and using this cutting edge. And you can also use it as an axe to hit somebody like a sword and something by a striking motion. So there's, again, it's a similar design. This is one of these jade, the white jade, with some of the dragon motif. And China at that time considered themselves as the son of a dragon. And this is a cup carved from crystal. It almost looked like glass, discovered in Hangzhou. This is the earliest decimal multiplication table written in bamboo strips using ink. So this is one of the very early writings. And this writing is mostly still understood by modern Chinese. So we talk about this is the end of this presentation. So any question?
The crystal, I've always wondered when what's the difference between crystal and glass, and when were both discovered or started roughly?
I really don't know what's the difference between crystal and glass.
Okay.
I think the crystal is something transparent. So this probably is.
Oh, it's carved from crystal. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it's carved from crystal.
Yep.
So what kind of crystal, I don't know. But I find it very interesting. We are talking about over 2,000 years ago. We have something transparent, a cup which looks like a cup today.
Yeah.
It's very similar to a cup today. So basically, I think this is the form which meets our needs. Obviously, this crystal glass or cup will be very precious at that time before people know how to make glass.
Yeah. Okay. And another one I had was I think there was a mention of Kublai Khan.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about Genghis Khan? When did he sort of?
Genghis Khan is still about 800 years later.
Oh, okay.
So we are talking about before Jesus was born, 200 years before.
Okay, because he took over pretty much the whole region, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the interesting thing about this time is the many different thinkers arrive producing their philosophy. So we have Plato in Europe. We have Buddha in India. And in China, we have Confucian, Laozi, Wuzi, a lot of other philosophers. It's all of them around this same time, within these 500 years. About 500 years before year 00, okay? Plus or minus maybe. Now, Muhammad is about 600 years CE, current era. And Moses probably is much older, but Plato, Buddha, Confucian, all is around 500 BC. So around that time, the world everywhere have a lot of thinkers happening. So is China. But the Chinese thinkers having so many different schools of thought. So the whole Chinese culture is actually a mix of all these ideas. We have the Maozi, we concentrate on standard, and that standardization give rise to, hello?
We just remembered it was Tuesday. We're very sorry.
No problem. I will put this online and then you will be able to watch it later on from YouTube. No problem with that one. But
much. It was terrible. The days just go and go and you don't know what day it is.
Detention after class.
But anyway, I'm about to end. But anyway, thank you for coming. And then I will put the YouTube up later today, so, including last week and this week. And you want, I can send out the address through the email system so that okay.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
But anyway, we will talk about the Chinese civilization, and next week I will explain the unique Chinese government, how we view the relationship between citizens and government. We talk about a lot of thinking today, the basic philosophy, but eventually how that get implemented in the later dynasties, which still affect our current Chinese thinking, so that to give you a better idea of how Chinese view the government. So that will be next week. By the way,
it's funny. One quick one. It's funny though with Confucius and so forth. They're gentle sounding religions, if you want to call it that. But there was still plenty of wars.
Yeah.
There? And the West's no better. I'm not saying they are.
Yeah.
I just think
Well,
it's
the philosophers are trying to convince the kings not to fight the war. And so they are promoting a lot of socialism ideas. The people there, the philosophers are wanting to reduce the suffering.
Okay.
So you see the contrast here. We have the kings trying to consolidate their power, want to expand. With the other hand, there's a whole number of scholars running around and telling the king, no, you be nice to people. You rule by love. You rule by rules and so on to make your kingdom strong. Yeah. And then eventually still. But anyway, after that, then China will not go through this as now. Chinese consider the best of the years when we have a stable government. And then when the government becomes corrupt, then we have uprising everywhere. And then we enter into the unstable period where people are fighting each other. Then eventually one of the stronger one will come on top and then make China unite into one country again. And then that is considered to be the best years for China. And there's another very ingrained thinking in Chinese, and therefore Chinese people appreciate stability very much, and they appreciate peace very much, because this is when Chinese consider the best of the years the government can give them, is to give them a stable, peaceful environment.
Yeah. Oh, well.
So again, this is from thinking at least 2,000 years ago. The Chinese already started this line of thought, and this line of thought obviously get developed over the years continuously. So there's a lot of adaptation into the ideas. But next time I try to explain to you the key ingredients of the stable Chinese government. What are the elements which make Chinese government so stable, and that we consider ourselves a 5,000 years continuous culture? Why? How do we maintain that continuity? So that will be the focus of next week.
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
Thanks.
See you then in the channel today then. Bye-bye.
Bye.